territorial displays and battles of these hippos means they do not have to contend with the immediate problem of survival. They have the luxury of making a claim on space. But this situation will change because Africa is unpredictable. It marches to its own rhythm. So does this small channel of sweet water that is the only home some of these hippos have ever known. This story is about that unpredictability, about one small critical part of one long irregular cycle. This is the chronicle of the Stolen River. In Botswana, in southern Africa, this strange channel flowed out of a northern source called Linyanti into a region of semi-desert. It brought water to the interior of this vast wilderness called Savuti, offering life to a great diversity of species. Although the channel was the center of all activity, it had a record of unreliability. Myths and tribal tales, hunters' stories and explorers' diaries all tell us that the river has changed. At one time, it was a vast lake, then dry for 80 years. Then it began to flow again in 1957. No one knows the cause for the inconstant supply of water to Savuti. Theories range from blockages to earth tilts caused by seismic activity. But the theories are irrelevant. What is important is that the river changes. And changes are what keep these savannas alive. Changes in nature usually take place so gradually that they are difficult to record with any continuity. This one took place over 7 years. A short time in the usual progression of changes in Africa, but it was the turning point in this random cycle. When there was water in the channel, Savuti was paradise for the animals, apparently timeless and unchanging. But there was death, even in paradise. Death is everywhere in Africa, but it is never in vain. This hippo, a victim of a territorial fight, sustains the life of a range of other species, including the fish eagles, usually hunters, but now turned scavengers. The death of one species inevitably benefits another. Africa is indifferent, but not cruel. Chance governs all. Perhaps the behavior of the birds was an omen, a hint that the old established order was about to change. The element that decided who would win and who would lose in Savuti was the heat. On the open plains, in the direct sunlight, the temperatures soared and seemed to set the shimmering earth on fire. In 1982, the Savuti Channel stopped flowing. It is not fully known how or why or precisely when, but suddenly the water stopped. As the precious supply of moisture began to dwindle, the animals started to congregate around the drying pools. The heat rose. Tempers frayed. Since his life depended on it, this bull elephant began to zealously guard his water. As if he possessed some insight into the tragedy that was about to unfold, he drove off the weaker and the smaller until he was free to drink in peace. The water level in the channel continued to drop, and the elements of the tragedy began to assemble. For the wild dogs, the persistent elephant at his waterhole was merely an irritation, but it stopped them from drinking at leisure. As the season progressed, the channel shrank. The once vigorous herd of over 100 hippos had been reduced to just 26. These hippos, desperately trapped in the disappearing water, needed to stay moist. Without the mud, they would die. Previous territorial conflicts were irrelevant. A far greater struggle for survival had taken over. The elephants had no such problem. They could come and go as they pleased. Like careless children, they sprayed and wallowed and churned up the mud, unaware that their play would hasten the end of the hippos. The elephants could leave, but the hippos had to remain, encased in their slowly but relentlessly drying mud pool. They, like the crocodile, had nowhere to go. Sadly, the hippos that did wander off to find food discovered that theirs was a hopeless plight. Lying exposed to the harsh, unrelenting sun and tormented by oxpeckers, they found on their return that their places had been taken in the mud pool. The heat persisted. At a desperate attempt to cool down, a crocodile entombed himself in a rock crevice, hoping to cheat death. But death takes many forms, and these were times of stress and extremes. The crevice was too narrow, even for the agile leopard. But killers are patient. Knowing that the crocodile would eventually emerge, weakened and perhaps thinner, but still edible. He settled down to wait. The predators in Savuti bide their time in anticipation of nightfall. At dusk, some hippos surrender their places in the mud, leaving its protection in search of food. Only the desperate ventured out at night, when the predators are veiled in darkness. There was a certain inevitability about this. The hippos were defenseless, since their usual retreat was unavailable. Hyenas are unrelenting. As hard as this may be to accept, it is Africa's ancient way, the law that governs the future and the past. Just as inevitably, the crocodile emerged, and the leopard's vigil was rewarded. Once again, one dies so that others can live. Dawn over another pool, where a different drama of survival was being played out. Marabou storks glided in to land beside a pool where more than 2,000 barbelfish were writhing in the shallow mud. They made easy prey. The strategy for selection of the strongest was at work once again. Lions tend to be curious creatures and usually investigate any activity. Attracted by the commotion, but indifferent to the fish, they came down only to drink. As the months rolled by, the effects of the heat on the pool left most of the hippos stranded. They either left and perished in the waterless wilderness or succumbed to predators until finally, by the end of the third dry season, only 3 hippos remained in the clinging mud of the last pool in Savuti. Their fate hung precariously in the balance. Increasingly desperate, as the pool dried ever faster in the heat, they struggled to coat themselves with mud to preserve that minute spark of remaining life. As the long day dragged on, the sun beat down. Inevitably, the hyenas arrived, drawn by the scent of impending death. Its source? One of the last 3 hippos left alive in Savuti. He left the protection of the mud to seek shelter in the shade. But the sun moved on, the shadows slid away, and he was left, alive but exhausted, unable to move or offer any defense. At the mercy of the sun, the hyenas had only to wait. Only the tracks in the mud of the Savuti Channel mark the final journey of the last 2 hippos. The channel was dry. The sun had triumphed. The river had been stolen. It was then that the elephants arrived. Each year, the breeding herds made the same journey from their feeding grounds. Each year, they stopped at the Savuti Channel to drink and prepare for their final desert trek northward. They used Savuti as an important midway stopover. But this year, things had changed. Arriving exhausted and dehydrated from their long journey, to find no water was a devastating blow. Tension rose and aggression flared. These animals knew only too well that the nearest water was over 60 miles away. They also knew, with the wisdom of their kind, that they faced a desperate crisis. Some, at least, had been in this position before. The older ones had seen the channel dry. Silently, eerily, the elephants continued to arrive, like ghosts from the past. But they had not surrendered yet. They began a mysterious, almost magical activity. Whether by knowledge passed down through the generations, or by instinct, or for some other inexplicable reason, the elephants were driven to dig for water. At every old water point they dug, in every hollow and in every depression. As if attracted to some hidden sign, they searched. Even the slightest hint of moisture was given a further examination. When the first tentative discovery was made, other elephants approached and waited and watched until finally the miracle happened. They found water. How all the other elephants knew can only be guessed. Yet the moment water was found, elephants from all over Savuti began to gather. Patiently, calmly, the elephants enlarged and deepened the place of their first discovery. Until finally, after months of work, there was water for all. For some, the discovery came too late. Hyenas, ever watchful, ever prepared to dispose of the dead, moved in. While the last hippos in Savuti had lasted through season after season of drought, surviving on moisture from the early morning dew and sheltering during the day, time had finally run out. But his death prolonged the life of others. Nearby, the elephants had excavated a water hole. In the cool of the night, the water would seep up into the depression from underground. At this seepage point, a new drama began to unfold. The elephant cows had new priorities. Instead of sharing this precious seepage water with the calves, they pushed their young away roughly. In these times of stress, it was better that the calves should die so that the females could survive to breed again in better times. It was a bitter and supremely harsh reality, but this was a crisis, and their collective wisdom ensured the survival of the species. One morning, the last surviving hippo in Savuti, which had left its tracks in the dry channel, had miraculously found the new water. He was not welcomed. The elephants guarded the precious water hole carefully. Their lives depended on it. To have prevailed against marauding hyenas and dehydration was miraculous. Now, with no other choice left for survival, the young hippo had to get back into the moisture. He was not about to give up at this stage. Finally, by sheer determination and perseverance, he succeeded in securing his future, at least for the time being. This new disturbance at the waterhole added to the stress of the breeding herds, and they were skittish and nervous. To have survived at all was improbable. To have found this waterhole barely credible. But he did. The waterhole became the new center of activity, with some strange, slightly comical adaptations for drinking the precious seepage. Delicate trunks reached for the water without disturbing the mud. The days of carefree splashing were gone. Once the waterhole was opened and maintained by the elephants, it became the focal point for huge numbers of animals from all over Savuti. Seemingly from nowhere, buffalo and baboons, and yet more elephants crowded into the area. Season after season passed, with no relief from cloudless skies. The situation worsened. The animals stirred up the mud, and the drinking water became harder and harder to find. Now the normal rules governing individual space had broken down completely. Enemies and competitors were forced to tolerate one another. They mingled closely, desperately searching for the best drinking water in the churned-up mud. With these herds constantly around the seep, the forage was soon exhausted. Trees were reduced to bare sticks, and water alone was not enough to sustain the animals. The elephants were forced to make journeys of nearly 20 miles each day for food. Backbones began to show. Skin sagged. They returned from their foraging journeys exhausted, barely able to stand. Soon, the inevitable happened. Whether it is morbid fascination, a learning process, or the mourning of a lost companion is unknown. But elephants seem to recognize their own dead and hesitantly confront it. Africa is frugal. On a continent this harsh, there can be no waste. The scavengers descended. Lions are constantly on the lookout for an easy meal and were quick to follow the vultures. It is much easier to scavenge than to hunt. Faced with such a giant feast, the whole pride settled in. They were secure, relaxed, and unhurried. The giant carcass became a playground for the younger lions. In the seep itself, another exhausted, starving elephant was stuck helplessly in the mud. The inquisitive lion swiftly investigated the new activity, always on the alert for a new opportunity. But the other elephants were protective of their own. Meanwhile, the lone young hippo grazed placidly on the short grasses. But this was not enough for him. Drawn by the odor of the partially digested grasses in the stomach contents of the dead elephant, he moved in. The lions were clearly irritated, but the hippo refused to be intimidated. Finally, after he had tasted the grasses, the lions became too aggressive, and he decided to retreat. But not far. Perhaps, having come so close to death, a mere lion could no longer inspire dread. And in the darkness, a kind of truce was set up between the lions, the young hippo, and the elephants around the seep. During the night, water raised the level in the seep, but by day, evaporation and the animal's thirst lowered it again by inches. In the morning, the dying elephant was still fighting for life, and the dawn had brought no change in the calm with which the young hippo faced the lions. The lions were no longer hungry, but they couldn't resist taunting the hippo. He remained happily aloof. His previous experiences with vicious hyenas and larger lions had prepared him well for this encounter with the youngsters and their games. He was unprepared, however, for the new occupant of the seep when he returned. The seep had transformed again. Lions and hyenas lingered after feeding on the dead elephant, and once again the stress for all these animals was increased. With all this new activity of predators, hippo, and dying elephant, and with the water in the seep quickly turning to mud, the breeding herds of elephants were faced with a critical decision: to stay at the seep or to brave the long journey across waterless wilderness to reach the Linyanti River, flowing strongly more than 60 miles to the north. We have little understanding of how they make these decisions, but as one, the elephants moved off, and the hippo was left in residence in the seep. As the elephants began their long northward journey, storm clouds gathered. Savuti was to undergo another transformation. Like the other changes, from day to night, hot to cold, and moist to dry, this one was as crucial and as ancient. With sunset came a drop in temperature, and the clouds built. At midnight, the storm broke. The massive electrical discharges struck and ignited the wind-dried grasses. Another trial was ahead for Savuti. Yet another agent of change was set in motion. The ancient mythologists understood these changes when they said, "Fire lives in the death of air," because fire is an important ingredient of the savannas, and like the predators, an essential part of its survival. Without the type of change that both fire and predators impose on the system, it would stagnate and die. When the sun rose, it rose over a new kind of world. The old Savuti was gone. In its place was a barren, empty landscape, scorched free of greenery, scoured by fire, gutted by flame. Savuti was burnt out, the soils exposed to the elements. The hippo was untouched by the fire, secure in his muddy seep. The The few remaining resident elephant bulls had probably seen it all before. For these elephants, the climax of Savuti's transformation was not important. They could move on or adapt to the change. But change continued in Savuti. Now at its most vulnerable, the winds arrived. Yet even this is but one more event in an endless series that forms the destiny of Savuti. Even in its starkness, there is a mysterious beauty here. Savuti is not dead. Savuti is simply resting, waiting for a new dawn. The rain clouds build. But even when the rains do come, they will not bring back Savuti as it was before. That time has vanished. Only the flow of water can change that. But the channel will not flow this season. When it will flow again, no one knows.
Continue your exploration of the world with National Geographic magazine. Get 12 monthly issues filled with the same kind of spectacular photography you enjoy in National Geographic videos, plus captivating stories on fascinating people and places, incredible animals, yesterday's world and today's, amazing science and discovery. You'll enjoy all this by becoming a member of the National Geographic Society. You'll also receive 6 valuable maps, and you'll support important scientific research like the Titanic expedition. To join, phone or write the Society at this address.
Coming soon from National Geographic Video.
This was a land beyond the reach of man, beyond time itself. Left to flourish in primitive isolation, the island of Madagascar is alive with natural wonders, made rich by the ages. But now, time is running out. Through rapids and rainforest, over cliffs and through caves, against overwhelming odds, a team of explorers captures a remarkable portrait of a wildlife refuge under siege. Join National Geographic in the untamed wilds of Madagascar. In 1953, he came to conquer Everest, to lay claim to the greatest challenge known to mountaineering. Now, with a new mission, Sir Edmund Hillary returns to Nepal, not for Everest, but for the sake of its people. Journey with Hillary in the Himalaya, through a nation with a glorious past and an uncertain future. National Geographic joins a living legend on his triumphant return to Everest. They stalk through the darkness and live in gloom, bewitching the superstitious, bewildering the scientist. They only come out under cover of night. Now the shadows are lifted. Out of the mysteries of evolution come unsuspected forms of life, thriving in a secret world of beauty and brutality. A world we've barely glimpsed. National Geographic sheds new light on the strange creatures of the night.
National Geographic Video, undeniably collectible and affordably priced, only from Vestron Video.